They saw it happen. Every last one of them. Their eyes followed the shift like moths confused by a new kind of light. They witnessed the pieces rearrange themselves midair. The silence collapse into something louder than any scream they'd ever heard. And still, they couldn't name it. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it permanent. You didn't just change the room. You broke the room's understanding of cause and effect. The same people who laughed at you months ago sat there, stunned, blinking in confusion, as if trying to reload their mental operating systems. You didn't argue, didn't announce, didn't shout. You glitched their reality. And in that moment, you became untouchable. Not because you fought them, but because they no longer understood the rules you were playing by. There's something poetic about the moment a predictable world fractures. You didn't climb a ladder, you folded it. You didn't play their game. You warped the board until the game forgot its own rules. And that's why it scared them. Because their entire sense of superiority was built on assumptions. That you were less. That you would break. That you were incapable of evolution. They thought you were linear. That was their fatal flaw. They calculated based on a version of you that no longer existed. And when the new version walked in, colder, sharper, quieter, yet infinitely more surgical, they couldn't process it. The person they prepared to manipulate, contain, or dismiss had been replaced, not with noise, not with rage, but with an impossible stillness. A stillness that radiated the kind of precision only those who've already died once can carry. You didn't give them closure. You gave them vertigo. You made them question timelines, decisions, reality itself. One day you were struggling, broken, wheezy to define. The next, you moved like someone who never flinched. No build-up, no warning. Just a sudden rupture in the narrative they were comfortable with. It wasn't a comeback. It was a reset. A rewrite. Like you'd hacked the save file of your life and reloaded with all the cheat codes activated. But you didn't flaunt it. You simply moved. Walked into rooms that used to drown you and stood there like the architect. That subtle shift. That's what tore at their sanity. Because when someone they wrote off becomes someone they can't decode, the mind doesn't just panic. It shatters. They can't explain it. That's what drives them mad. They keep trying to reduce it. New job. New clothes. But it wasn't that. It was a psychological decapitation of every label they ever placed on you. You didn't change outfits. You shed skin. You didn't learn new words. You unlearned the need to speak to be heard. You stopped explaining, and somehow, the silence began echoing louder than their entire vocabulary of control. You walked different. Sat different. Your presence started doing what your pleading used to attempt, demanding respect. But now without asking. That's the glitch. That's the disruption. You rewired the equation. They can't explain your rise without confronting the lie they told themselves, that you would never rise at all. You rewrote your code in front of their eyes, without their permission. And now they stare like people watching footage they don't remember filming. They question their own memories. Was he always that calculated? Did we miss something? Were we wrong the whole time? Yes, they were. But admitting that would mean dismantling their entire internal architecture. So instead, they play dumb. They perform disbelief. They whisper nonsense like, it came out of nowhere, as if your growth was some cosmic accident. They missed it because they wanted to. They missed it because their ego needed you small. They missed it because the version of you that frightened didn't fit into the story they rehearsed. And now they're stuck in a loop. Seeing, but not understanding. Knowing, but not grasping. That's the glitch being witnessed in a form they never prepared for. They talked over you when you were soft. So you stopped whispering and started walking. And that walk, measured, unshakable, is what's devouring them now. They remember when you used to over-explain, used to over-apologize, used to try to fix their discomfort by shrinking yourself. But that version died quietly, off camera. The new one, it doesn't owe anyone clarity. You became the lesson they never thought they'd receive. You turned your entire presence into a confrontation. Now every step you take echoes the truth they didn't want to see. You didn't come to argue. You came to exist. And your existence, refined and sharpened, is a threat to their illusions. What they don't realize is you didn't just evolve. You escaped. Escaped the matrix of approval, the feedback loop of need, the emotional codependency disguised as community. You unplugged yourself, not by announcing it, but by becoming something they couldn't decode. A version of yourself that no longer requests access but demands response. Their optics weren't built for this. They were trained to dismiss disruption. But you didn't disrupt with rebellion. You disrupted by becoming untouchable. You became a paradox in their system. Someone who wasn't supposed to survive, and yet now forces every room to rearrange its energy upon entry. And here's where the glitch deepens. You're still silent. You're still not naming what you did. You let them guess. Let them project. Let them scramble for explanations while you remain unmoved. You've become a question they can't answer. And that question follows them into meetings, into mirrors, into late-night spirals. They see you laughing, calm, collected, and it stings. Not because you're mocking them, but because they thought they erased you. They thought they won. And now, you're standing in full control while they fumble with old narratives that don't match the version of you that rewrote the ending. Every room you enter now becomes a glitch in their perception of time. They can't match the past version with the current reality. It doesn't compute. That's what power feels like. Not noise. Not dominance. Just presence so refined that it disrupts the natural order of people who believed you were predictable. They blink too much when you're around. They avoid eye contact. They throw passive comments like darts, hoping something sticks. But nothing lands. Because you're no longer in their line of fire. You moved above it, not through power, but through clarity. They're stuck in confusion. You're living in control. They didn't expect laughter. They expected silence, bitterness, maybe even some clumsy attempt to regain footing. What they didn't prepare for, what slices into their pride with surgical precision, is that you're laughing. Not manically, not performatively, but with the kind of calm smile that says, I figured it all out. You sit back, unbothered, detached like someone who saw the storm long before it formed. That's what unnerves them. You're not playing defense. You're not pleading your case. You're sipping your drink centered, laughing at a punchline only you understand. And that destroys them more than any outburst ever could. Because their entire blueprint relied on the fantasy that you'd stay broken long enough for them to feel taller. They made a show of it, of your losses, your missteps, your quiet seasons. Oh, how they basked in it. Even cloaked in fox concern, their eyes sparkled with the thrill of your downfall. They thought they were safe in that narrative. They thought you were contained. But you didn't just return. You returned as someone who never left. They realized too late. You were watching the whole time. And now your calm is not silence. It's declaration. It's insult. It's the sound of someone who no longer cares to explain the chaos they survived. Your laughter is no longer for them. It's for yourself. For the absurdity of how predictable their betrayal was. And when that laugh spills out without effort, without apology, they hear a truth louder than thunder. You don't need them. It stings because your peace proves something terrifying. They had no real impact. Oh, they wanted to be villains in your story. They wanted to be scars. They wanted to be remembered. But you robbed them of that. You laughed. You moved on. You carried none of them with you. And that is unbearable to people who only feel real when they're breaking others. You denied them the one thing they crave more than anything: significance. You turned their betrayal into background noise, their gossip into static. You didn't just rise. You rose without flinching. And that makes you dangerous. Because nothing is scarier to shallow minds than someone who thrives without validation. They study your calm now like a glitch in their programming. Because it doesn't make sense. You're not supposed to be this at ease. Not after what they did. Not after how they tried to write you off, lock the door, bury your name beneath the weight of their smugness. But here you are, dressed in composure, outlined by quiet success, and most offensive of all, still laughing. They can't understand how you aren't bitter. That's because bitterness implies you still care. And you don't. You burn the bridge and never look back. You're not trying to teach them a lesson. You're not seeking closure. You are the closure. The calm they see is your signature on the final page. There's a different kind of cruelty in emotional clarity. You didn't shout. You didn't retaliate. You simply outgrew the whole performance. Your laughter is lighter now because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours. You stopped bleeding for people who handed you knives. And while they spiral, dissecting your every word and movement, you remain untouched. That's the sting. That's the slow, creeping agony they now live with. You're no longer within reach. No longer playing in the emotional sandbox they tried to bury you in. You're elsewhere. Beyond. Evolved. And your smile? It's the announcement that they lost access to the old version of you forever. Psychologically, you've become a mirror. One they can't avoid, but can't stand to face. Your laughter, cool, unbothered, rich with irony, reflects everything they feared their efforts didn't destroy you, didn't even scratch the surface. Now they second-guess their own worth. Because if someone they tried so hard to break ends up laughing in peace, what does that say about their power? What does that say about them? That's the collapse. That's the sting. That's what makes them flinch when you enter the room. You didn't retaliate. You became proof that their influence is disposable. You see, people don't envy loud victories. They envy graceful survival. They don't hate the healed. They hate the healed who don't thank them for the wounds. You're calm. You're sharp. You're composed in a way that reveals the storm didn't change you. It refined you. And now, every moment you smile, every time you remain still when others would flail, you're sending a message they can't unheard. You were never as fragile as they hoped. You were just watching, learning, waiting. And now that you've emerged, they're scrambling, choking on narratives that no longer fit the reality you now wear like armor. What you possess is control, not over them, but over yourself. That's the highest form of power. They don't understand how you got it, but they feel its effects. You don't need revenge because you've mastered presence. That quiet, chilling clarity that bends the air around you. They talk less now, smile awkwardly. They're cautious, reserved, because they can't read you anymore. The old you is gone, and this new you. He doesn't explain. He doesn't justify. He doesn't chase. He walks through fire smiling, and that burns more than any flame ever could. Their punishment wasn't crafted by you. It was built from their own expectations. They waited for drama, for a scene, for the emotional fallout, and you gave them none. Instead, you rebuilt in silence, thrived in exile. You returned without scars, without announcements, just results. And now they're left with the bitter taste of confusion, wondering how the person they thought they buried is now miles ahead, laughing, calm, collected, and entirely out of reach. That's the real sting. That your joy came without needing their approval. That your growth invalidated their opinions. That your silence was the final word. And your smile, subtle, knowing, unfazed, is the moment they realized they were never the storm. You were. And they just mistook your stillness for surrender.